Whatever you did, however you fixed it, doesn't matter if it ends up being better or worse. We'll just go with you tried. Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and this is episode 189 in the series. Welcome back to the dining room. It's lovely to see all of you. And if you're coming back, thanks for coming back. Thanks for all the comments and the emails and joining me on the Saturday Zoom and hanging out. It's a lovely community that we have here, and I'm appreciating all of you. If you're new, this is a podcast about garment design, modification, things of that sort, and we will talk about a sweater today, I promise. If you are wondering where I've been, it is springtime. I'm finishing up the book. We planted an orchard and I visited the youngest kid. So it's been a little bit of a wild April. I will talk about the book too. Today is going to be the first installment of some book stuff for Reinventing Wool, which I'm excited to get to. But this episode is really primarily about the Botched background project. We all have them, we've all experienced them, and we're going to talk about them because it's something I want to get out there. You know, if you've been following the podcast for a while, you know that I'm someone who likes to just air the stuff that we don't always want to talk about. Like, I will show you the armpits of the sweater. I will show you the other side of the sweater. I will talk about the failures. So today we're going to talk about botched background projects. But usually, before we get started, I have to tell you where you can find me, just in case you are new here, especially I am Knitting the Stash just about everywhere on the internet. So here on YouTube, over on Instagram, on Ravelry, and on the main website, which is knittingthestash.com. It's kind of funny to have that kind of unity across platforms these days. For me, since I've been doing this for a long time, it was something that I'm glad I kind of pulled together back in the day. Anyway, there you go. And over on the website, you can find all the online classes and the Flock Farm Yarn Shop, which is still up and running. By the way, total, like, it's kind of like a secret thing that's happening, but I can tell you, I'll give you a hint. There will be, hopefully, a colorway coming out with the book. So yeah, we're working on that right now. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about when I talk about the book, there you go. I finished a book about a couple years ago called Reinventing Wool, and the book is now going to come out this fall. So it always takes a long time. When you finish a book to when it actually greets the world, it takes quite a while. So Reinventing Wool is coming out early September, and we've already seen page proofs. We know what the cover looks like. Yeah, it's an exciting process. So right now I'm doing the index for the book and doing the page proofs, which is where they show you what it's going to look like and you have to check it for errors. So finished that this week, and it is a really exciting time for the book. The book is about the ways, like what happened to wool during the synthetic revolution, and not just the ways that wool was like outmarketed by the synthetic products, but how wool was actually changed physically and metaphorically by what was happening with all the chemistry and the science and the petroleum products and things like that. So wool didn't just disappear. Wool had a really interesting interaction with the chemists, as I would like to say, and the marketers and everything else, trying to keep wool in the market in the 1950s and the 60s. So that's what the book is about. It's totally about wool, not about the synthetics. It's about what happened to wool, because that's the story that we're not often told. And that book it's taken a long time to write. It has some really fun stories in it, like a little sheep who gets washed in bathtubs in department stores, and the truth about lanolin. I mean, it's a great book. I can say that. I think I'm biased, but I really liked it. I enjoyed writing it. So that's the book I'm talking about. It's coming out in September. And I'm going to do some little segments on this podcast starting now to just give you little teasers about some of the things that are in the book, some of the research behind the book. So yeah, we'll get into that today. But first, let's talk about botched projects, shall we? And not just botched projects, but botched background projects. So a lot of you know that I knit sweaters. I knit sweaters all the time. That's my primary thing. Like right now I'm knitting a sweater for Spencer, which we will talk about in a minute. I'll give you an update. I teach classes about modification and design for sweaters. It's like my primary thing is sweaters. But when you knit a lot of sweaters, you often need something to knit in between. In those times when you're on the go, and like, for example, when I was visiting youngest kid, I was trying to pack very light because it was a weekend trip. I didn't want to drag this whole thing with me on the plane. It would be actually more volume than the rest of my luggage combined. So I needed something on the side. So you need these background projects sometimes. Like Maybe it's a blanket square that you're working on. You know, you have a few of them. Maybe it is a shawl or a scarf or a pair of socks or a hat or, you know, something that's just kind of in between your bigger projects. Some people call them palette cleansers. I totally go with that lingo. That is all good. But for me, it's like I call them background projects because they're not my primary focus. If I'm knitting a sweater, like Spencer's sweater here, I have done a lot of work to figure this sweater out. I have done some math, I have swatched, I have, in this case, knit 3 sleeves because one of them didn't work out. You know, it's a project that requires I'm gonna add this special stuff to the back. I thought about adding in the purl stitches so that I could crochet chain it later. I thought about the hood, I thought about the sizing, like everything, the yarn, you know, you're in project mode. You're like, I am going to figure this out because it is a big project. It's, you know, a lot of yarn, a lot of money, a lot of time, a lot of like, you want someone to actually be able to wear it. This is a gift, you know, like there's a lot of layered stuff here. So you put the time in, right? You swatch, you do all the things. Well, I know some of you don't, but I would guesstimate that a lot of you who are doing these bigger sweater projects and watching this podcast are people who are probably doing some sweater math and swatching and really thinking about your projects. Okay, in contrast to the focused main project, the background project is something that you grab because you're getting on a plane, for example, and you have nothing to knit. And you're like, what would be a quick, simple thing that would be like a single skein of yarn or a little baggie of yarn that I could bring with me? I can sit on the train with it. I need it. I'm going to a meeting and I'm going to die if I have to sit there without something in my hands. It's something that you're just like grab and go, right? And we don't usually put the thought into these kinds of projects. We tend to, I'm going to say me, I shouldn't say we. I'm going to say if you're doing background projects though, you probably aren't putting as much concentrated thought into the planning, the editing, all that kind of stuff. So I was on my way to visit youngest kid, and I remembered that I had some yarn still left over from my light bright sweater, which is that beautiful faded sweater. I had since knit a hat with the same yarn, and I was still trying to use up that yarn. So I wanted a simple pattern. I was like, well, I could grab that yarn, so it would be a beautiful fade. I know how it works. And I found this pattern. This is called The Simple Thing. I will put the architect of the pattern, the designer, on the screen here because I cannot think of her name right now. This is called The Simple Thing. I believe it's a free pattern on Ravelry. I'm pretty sure it is. And it is a gorgeous, pretty much single or two skein. It's supposed to be in DK weight, so I think it's a 2 skein project with this integrated I-cord that you start from the very beginning of the project and you just work your I-cord throughout the project, so you're not having to do any finishing except for weaving in ends if you're using different colors. Hers, I think her original version is, like I said, a DK weight, and she just uses a 2 skeins of yarn to finish this project. It all depends on how you want to do it. And the pattern includes lots of different ways to kind of modify the design. You could make it longer, shorter, less wide, wider, all the things, right? Because basically all you're doing is here's my point of greatest increase is up here. So you start with, I think it's 3 stitches. Again, free pattern, I'm not giving anything away. And you're working garter stitch, and then you're getting slowly increasing this side of the triangle until you get to a point, and then you start decreasing. So you basically end up with, you know, just this kind of triangle shape, right, in the end. Brilliant design, very quick, simple, fun to knit, easy, highly recommend. I thought to myself, I don't have any DK weight that I want to use right now. So I really want to use up these skeins from the sweater, fingering weight, so I held it double, garter stitch, there you go. I also had this extra leftover from a hood that I made recently too, right after the light bright sweater. And hey, look at that, they fade perfectly into each other. This is 1 skein, 2, 3, 4, 5. That was the light bright minus 1 skein plus the extra from the hood. So as I'm knitting on this trip, I'm like, this is looking pretty good, right? It's like, I'm very satisfied with the way that this blended into this, blended. I mean, come on, that's just, and every time I pull it out, someone would be like, that's so beautiful. I'm like, yeah, because it was part of a fade set, right? I mean, this was a planned set of yarn, that, except for this bottom part, that's intended to fade one into the other. So made my life super easy. Now the problem is, background project, I knew I was gonna run out of yarn at some point. Like I knew, given the width of this shawl, and I didn't go super wide or super big, but I knew given the size of this shawl that I was making, I was gonna run out of my main yarns. And I did. And I tried to run out at a transition point, you know, where the shawl kind of reached its apex of width. And then I was gonna decrease down. And you can see that things start going okay, start out okay. And I don't know, I'm really curious to know what you all think about this. It's one of those things that's bugging me, but maybe it's not bugging anybody else. So this is all the light bright kit. It ends about here. I started marling in some other yarns here. I got to this purple, which is a variegated yarn, and that's all working pretty well. I think, you know, as far as like a shawl goes, that color is working pretty well because this is a variegated yarn. These are things you're thinking about, right? Like how do you, marl and fade colors? Obviously this is a set that was intended to fade into each other. So the colors, each skein had a little bit of the color from the last skein. So it's like a perfect fade. Over here, it's not such a perfect fade, but it's like colors. Like they're working out okay. Now the problem for me is right here. This is where I think everything got a little botched. I ran out of like variegated yarn and I was like, oh, I'll just throw in this really soft, pretty yarn that I had from one of my other trips from Greece when I was also background knitting, something that I picked up. And here's where the problem starts. It's fine right through here. You know, this is relatively okay. I think it's not great. It's not the perfect fade of the other side, but it's kind of where things start to go wrong. And I will say, you can see I have a little bit of this dark yarn up in here because originally I've knit this 3 times right now, this part of the shawl. This is what's frustrating me. I cannot get a fade that I'm happy with on this side of the shawl, especially when you're comparing it to this fade on the other side of the shawl, which is like utterly a perfect fade, right? I know we're not going for perfection here, I know that, but as someone who cares about color and how color looks, I do want this to like work out. So originally I had transitioned from this blue into this really dark blue, and then I transitioned to the purple. Now that really didn't work because you can imagine this is not a variegated yarn. This is the main problem, I think. This is not a variegated yarn. So you're getting this block of just flat color here. And even when you try to blend it in with the other skeins and use the same technique that I used for all the other blending, you can see it probably up here the best. You know, as much yarn as I had, I tried to blend it. You just end up with a block of color, and then I finished it off with this color, which was just like, why? Why did I do that? I really don't know. So this is the right side, technically. There's not really a right or wrong side, but that's how it looks on the right side. Very unhappy with this part, somewhat unhappy up here. So then I started thinking, like, obviously, I wasn't planning. I was grabbing random skeins of yarn. At one point, this was integrated. This is like a greenish, not a variegated yarn, but like a glazed yarn from a Mad Tosh project. This one was in there at some point. It is absolutely the wrong, I don't know if it's hue or tone. I'm not very good with the color terminology, but it's wrong. It's kind of jewel tony, but it's not the right jewel tonies for this particular project. I had a flat purple in there that I blended in. It looks a little bit variegated, but it's not. It's very flat. I used this for a pair of socks. So I knit this. This is the 3rd version, and I'm still not happy with it. And I think I figured out the solution. So I just wanted to encourage all of you to think through, like, what do you do with a botched background project? Let's do some solutions. Not only the problem, but let's talk about solutions. And so you can, of course, do what I was doing, which is you keep frogging it back to the place that you're not satisfied, right? You can frog the whole thing, you can frog the half of it, you can frog the sleeve you don't like, you can frog the part of it, right? You can also just finish it, throw it in the gift bin, and be done with it, which is very tempting at this point. You can just be like, yo, it's all knitting and it's all wool anyway. I'm gonna wear this thing and it's gonna keep me warm. The utilitarian approach, right? But you could also use it as a reason to learn something, which is generally where I tend to go. So my thinking was, I don't want to just wear this. I don't want to just gift it. I want to figure out what is going on with the colors that's not right to my eye and try to fix it. And I think the first thing I figured out is the flat color. Flat colors are not going to work in here, because what I really like about this so far, the really pretty side, is it is all these variegated yarns. They just happen to blend together. And like I said, it wasn't a perfect set. I mean, this came from a different yarn. It's not that it's not possible to blend them together. We've all seen the Find Your Fade from Andrea Mowry, where you can just kind of grab all kinds of skeins and do things like that. So one thing to do would be to look at other patterns like the Find Your Fade, or go back to Light Bright, or some of the other patterns where people are fading and marling yarn together, get some tips. Go to a color book. Felicia Lowe has an excellent book about color. And there are tons of books out there about, using variegated yarn and things like that. But I thought the other thing that's going on here is that there may not be a way to recreate a perfect fade in the yarns that I have. And this is a problem for a lot of background projects that end up botched. You go to your stash because you're like, it's a quick project. I'm just going on a trip. I'm just going to a meeting. I'm just, right? You go to your stash. Your stash doesn't always have the right yarn in the right combination of things. And it's not that you don't have the yarn in your stash that could make the project go right, but it maybe is that you're like, I'm gonna do a background project and I'm gonna stash bust and I'm gonna use up my scraps, right? And I'm just gonna use this colorway that I hated when I knit something else out of it, and you put it into your background project. Well, all of those decisions end you in this place, right? So going to your stash isn't necessarily a problem, but you need to go to your stash with a purpose in mind that's not just like, I gotta grab whatever's left over. So yeah, what I'm thinking I need to do here is, instead of trying to replicate the beauty and the perfection that is this fade, I'm thinking that one solution would be to do a much more solid, just a solid kind of color, or not even a solid color, a single variegated skein on the other side of the project, right? You get to the apex here where everything's good, and then you just switch for this part to a single variegated skein that's not leftover, like crack a new one open for goodness sake. Not a leftover skein, but a purposefully chosen skein that has some element of this Julie toned, brighty, summery kind of colors. Sorry, Tink is in the background whining. I'm not sure why. Maybe she dropped her little baby dog. Find a skein that has some kind of complement or some kind of aspect of this fade in it, but it's not trying to replicate the fade, and just do a single variegated skein on the other side. Because then you got an interesting shawl that has like the cool fade on one side and the single kind of variegated color on the other. I think that's the primary way to do this. Another would be to try to identify another fade that you do have in your stash that could work, because we usually have minis that are faded together, or other skeins of yarn that are a big fade. The trick with that is that this is your background project. You're not trying to spend a lot of time and money and supplies and everything on it, so you may not want to crack into like multiple skeins. That's why I'm thinking a single variegated skein might take me to the end of this and give me a shawl that I'm actually happy with. Now that means knitting it a fourth time. It means taking more time out of my sweater knitting schedule to work on this, what was supposed to be a background project. And yes, that's kind of like that. You could take that as like a moment of frustration, like, this was supposed to be a quick 1 week knit, and now I've knit it 4 times. But you know what? I've learned a lot from this one. I've learned a lot by putting these colors together. And yes, I could have swatched everything, but you can't swatch large enough sometimes to see the fade in action, because you would really need to see the fade move through the different colors. I've learned a lot about, like, I'm happier with this, much happier, like with the way that this goes to about here. It's pretty good. So I do know that it's the solid versus the variegated is part of the problem here. We get 2 solid-ish yarns at the end. But I also think there's something to be learned, or something to be said about when you buy a yarn set that is intended to fade, and this one's intended to fade all that way, right? And it even has an extra skein in there that has less yellow and a little more white in it. when you buy a fade set, they really are meant to be together. And it's not worth it necessarily to try to replicate the good that you have in one place in another place if you don't want to spend the time and money and supply, get the supplies that are going to give you that same kind of fade. Do something else. It's kind of like, instead of like, I have a green and I'm going to try to go matchy with the green, but it's a different green, just go something totally other, like go a purple, do a blue, do something else. And that contrast will actually make your project more interesting, and it will highlight the cool fade that you do have already, without taking away from it and without, driving you crazy like this side is making me crazy. It's also made me think a lot about, I think it would be really easy with a botched background project like this to feel like either really proud of yourself because you managed to take the yarns that were intended for one kind of fading and do a totally different kind of fading. This is a very different method of fading because it's garter, and you can't, if you worked color work like the original fade, you would end up with all kinds of floats on the back. So I did a very different fading method here. So I was pretty proud. Like I got to this half and I was like, yeah, look how good this is working out. I must know what I'm doing. And then I'm confronted with this half where it just seems like, wow, I don't know what I'm doing here. It's a little bit hodgepodge. Like, how did this go so wrong over and over again? And I think it's important for us as knitters to not feel, it's not that you don't want to feel the highs and the lows, but it's like, it's all a learning process. So yes, I made some good choices. I'm going to recognize that. I made some good choices on this side of the shawl. The way that I chose to fade everything, the fact that I was able to add in this extra colorway to make it all kind of like work out and get, an extra blend in there. But I also stopped. I didn't plan as much on this side. I didn't think everything through. I didn't create an object from the ground up that I thought would work. I just kind of like threw some yarn at it and just kept trying something, and it's not working. So obviously I need to use a different tactic. And I feel like this side of the shawl has taught me a lot about color that I hadn't thought about before, or I hadn't thought about very specifically in these ways. So I do think I'm going to take this back. I'm going to pull it all the way back to this last blue here, and I'm going to just choose a single skein of variegated yarn and go with that for the other half of the shawl. See where we get. Learning project again. It might not work because in that picking of the extra skein, I might not select the perfect color that's going to blend with everything or match with everything. But I think it will look better than what I've done here. It's a learning process, and I'm pretty happy about knitting. So I'll just knit some more, right? That's what we do. So that's my thoughts on the botched background project. And since I'm going to be fixing this one, why don't we do this together? How about that? I'm guessing a lot of you have botched background projects in your stash, in your tubs, in your knitting project bags, in your baskets. How about we work on these together? And I'll open up a Ravelry thread, like I said, and if you post a picture of your botched object and your fixed boxed object, whatever you did, however you fixed it, doesn't matter if it ends up being better or worse. We'll just go with you tried. If you leave us a photo over there in the Ravelry group, I will enter everyone to win in the giveaway. I'll do a giveaway of a skein of yarn from the Flock Farm Yarn Shop. So let's say June 1st, photo of your fixed and botched objects over in the Ravelry thread, and I'll do a drawing right around the beginning of June for that make along. How about that? Let's do it together, okay? So yeah, I'm gonna turn this around because I do feel a little better about the other side of this thing. Yeah, this side, really good. We're gonna fix the other side. It's gonna be awesome. So I give you a little update on Spencer's sweater since I've been working so much on my background knit, which was supposed to just be here and there. I got kind of obsessed with it and left Spencer's sweater a little bit undone. But it does have 2 sleeves now, and this was actually the third sleeve. I knit 3 sleeves, so 1, 2, 3, because one of them was botched. But they're fixed now. They have the cool stripes on them, and someone I think it was Mary in the Saturday Zoom group said, that really looks like a sweater Spencer would wear. So I hope it is. I've almost finished with the back. This is the hood that's getting put together right now, but I've almost finished with the back, where I've added those neat vertical stripes with a purl row and then followed up with a crochet chain to knit some stitches into those little furrows. I have one more to go, and that's the back of his sweater, and then the hood, which is coming together really nicely. So yeah, Spencer's sweater's all right. It just needed some love and attention that needs to be taken away from the background project. So there you go. So let's switch from botched background projects to main projects, such as the book that I finished writing about wool. So like I said, Reinventing Wool is coming out in September, and I want to give you all some sneak peeks of some fun things on this podcast as we get up to September. So I thought one of the first things to do is talk about the research, some of the things that I found in the archives, because I know a lot of you are into the history of wool, where it comes from, the wool industry, all that kind of good stuff. And I thought I'd start with a classic, because this is something that Felicity Ford actually posted about in her Wovember, on the Wovember site back in 2015. This is where I originally heard about this source. And I don't know if anyone's, like, if this has made its way into the community lore of all the knitting world, but I thought I'd highlight it because it's a pretty interesting campaign that happened in the UK, in Britain in particular, like London, mostly in London, I think, on the subway system. There was a "There is no substitute for wool" campaign, and basically this was at the point in the 1950s when there was the rise of the synthetics. We have nylon by 1934, if I'm remembering right. And then the war happens and nylon is in short supply because it's used for a lot of the war preparations. But these things are coming back. We're post-World War II, synthetics are on the market, people are wanting like wash and wear clothing, and wool is starting to suffer in the 1950s. And this is where wool's market share begins to really dip. So there were a lot of campaigns that came out that were pro-wool. A lot of the campaigns that I talk about in the book are in the United States, but this one was in the UK, so that's where I thought we'd start. So in the UK, they came up with a plan to try to get people hyped up about wool, and they basically asked for people to submit poems that would end with the slogan, "There is no substitute for wool." And the winners would be posted in like the London subways and, you know, other public spaces, and they would win £5 sterling. So it was a way to get people to write fun poetry and get this slogan out there, "There is no substitute for wool." Now, Richard Proctor compiled a bunch of these poems in a book, "There is no substitute for back in 2005. And Felicity Ford mentions this book as well. I'm not sure how easy it is to get a hold of this book. It was one that I picked up. I think I got it on eBay or, you know, used on one of the you know, used book sites. But one of the fun things about this campaign is that a lot of times people would use hilarious historical figures in their poems. So you can see from the table of contents here, perhaps, and I'll read a few of these out. But you have like King Midas, you have Henry V, King Arthur, you have Rip Van Winkle, so both fictional characters, Christopher Columbus, Benjamin Franklin, like all kinds of Venus, Helen, right? I mean, these like, if you have a funny character, let's use it. This is William Tell, right? This one on this page. As William Tell reached for his quiver, he saw his son begin to shiver. "Art frightened, lad, to face the arrow? No, Dad, just frozen to the marrow." They fixed him up with scarf and sweater. Then Will took aim and, "That's better." "Lad," he said, then whang he shot. The apple fell, the boy did not. Proving again the golden rule, there is no substitute for wool. You really have to work these rhymes. I'm kind of struck by that a little bit here. And let's see, let's find one more for you. This one's just called, it says, "The rocket thundered up the track with fireworks streaming from its stack. The public took it somewhat hard. How tiresome to be chilled and charred. But Stephenson was on the ball. He issued woolen rugs to all. They're proof against both wind and flame, he said. He said, more honor to his name. The travel-wise endorse this rule. There is no substitute for wool." I love these. Anyway, so Richard Proctor has compiled them all here. He has a bunch of notes in the back about, you know, who some of these characters are. So the one we just read, he has a note here on George Stephenson, who was a British engineer who built his first locomotive in 1815. He has lots of little notes in here to help kind of contextualize everything. Including the authors, this is a note on the writers, the authors of these rhymes came in two categories. He said there were the amateurs who responded to the challenge of a public competition, but there was another category of writer brought in by the success of the campaign. They were professional writers at the top of their profession, like E.S. Turner, who wrote for Punch, the most famous magazine in England. Now in his 90s, he's still writing wittily for magazines, and that was back in 2005. So, he has a note on the cartoonist as well. So anyway, if you're interested in wool's history and you like good poetry or silly poetry about wool and then There's No Substitute for Wool campaign, I would recommend Richard Proctor's book, which I do believe is still available out there at used bookstores. And it's kind of our first installment. So that was one of the UK campaigns for wool in the 1950s as it was starting to lose its market share. And in my book, I talk a lot about the campaigns for wool in the United States, including Lisa Faraday and Woolly Woolite. And we'll talk about that one in a future episode. So we'll just keep them coming. I hope these little tidbits will get you interested in the book, but also interested in the history of wool because it's a fascinating history. And I hope we learn more and more about it as we go along. So there you go. That's pretty much it for today. A little bit of wacky, a little bit of botched, a little bit of good things, a little bit of book stuff. And I want to say thank you to the podcast producers. That's Lenore, Laura, Bethany, Kendra, Rose, Jennifer, Mary, Tony, Christine, and a big thanks to Nargis as well. Yeah, I'll see you in a couple of weeks. I hope you all have some fun knitting and get over the Ravelry thread. Let's take care of these botched background projects together. Take care. Bye-bye.